All right, potential peace negotiations hanging by a thread as President Trump's team awaits Iran's response to their latest proposal to end hostilities that the regime says they officially sent through Pakistan. Now, both sides exchanged fire earlier this weekend near the Strait of Hormuz, though President Trump says the ceasefire remains intact even after his, quote, love tap destroyed many of Iran's small military boats. But today, Iran's regime officials are saying their, quote, restraint is over. They have drones and weapons locked and loaded on U.S. targets while publicly announcing its new supreme leader is now in good health. Let's discuss all of this with political science professor and director of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats at the University of Chicago, Professor Robert Pape. He's also the author of the Escalation Trap Substack. Professor, good to see you. 2 weeks in a row. We have to make it a third. You posted an interesting tweet Saturday where you asked why Iran's strategy is succeeding over the United States. The regime appears to be going on offense, telling countries if they enforce U.S. sanctions against Iran, their vessels will face problems going through the Strait of Hormuz. Do you believe, I guess, reading that you think the administration needs to change course?
So first, Joe, nice to be on with you. Also, I'd like to say a word of great appreciation to all those in the military who can't be with their mothers today. Thank you for your great service. We really do appreciate that. So the key thing to understand, Joe, is that what's happening is not about today, tomorrow, not about temporary pauses, temporary escalations, love taps. What's really, we're in a transition now to who controls the world's economy. And that boils down to who can control the Strait of Hormuz and the shipping across the Strait of Hormuz. And from the get-go, the administration's strategy has been a bet, which is that Iran will not have the capability to actually shut down shipping across the Strait of Hormuz. That bet was the strategy, and that bet, I'm sorry to say, has clearly now failed. We're now shifting gears. Secretary Rubio last week clearly explained the goal where the administration's not going to leave Iran in control of the world's economy, that is the Hormuz checkpoint. But what that really means for us and our troops and our country here is a long war. Trump doesn't want to say it. I understand all the political reasons, but this means a long war.
Well, look. Playing devil's advocate here, if we're going back and forth in the old classroom, we're looking at many things, right? There is the immediate aspect of whether or not they can get the strait opened up. But that does not just impact commerce for the world and certainly the price of gas here at home. It also impacts our chief adversary and arguably Iran's staunchest ally, which is the Chinese Communist Party, which, as you know, they do have this oil consumption quagmire that they're in, right? They need stable. Well, hold on. Well, just go, because look, we know for a fact China, they're consuming close to 16 to 17 million barrels per day. We know for a fact that they also are importing 11 to 12 million barrels, and we know that 50% of that is coming from the Middle East. So, yes, they do have, in theory, over 1 billion gallons in reserve or barrels in reserve, but they're not going to spend all of it. So is it fair to say that perhaps what the administration might also be doing is try to say that China is going to be starving, that in 60 to 90 days they're going to have a real problem that cannot actually be eased by Russia, cannot be eased by Venezuela because they're now a trapped actor, and all of a sudden the pressure on China also now comes to bear as we try to make sure that Iran is going to become an honest actor once again. What do you say to that?
So we're going to have a test of this, Joe, on Wednesday. We don't have to wait months and weeks. This is going to happen in just a few days because President Trump is going to be face-to-face with President Xi. Now, just to go back to some other numbers that are not widely reported, only 20% of China's economy depends on energy, depends on oil. Of that 20%, only 38% is coming from the Persian Gulf. Last summer in June, when we were bombing Bordeaux, I was in China visiting their advanced industries on the shop floor with the business executives. They walked me through those numbers and they said, yes, that means China will lose 1 or 2% of their GDP. That's right. That's what's at risk, not 20%, 1 or 2%. But what that also means is America will face even bigger problems. And so as they explained it to me, and I think this is quite reasonable given the numbers, yes, China will be hurt, America will be hurt more, and we're going to see who's really got the leverage in about 3 days.
Well, I think the reality is you look at two factors, right? It's what is the pain threshold of the Chinese people, which you can make the argument the Chinese Communist Party does not care about the pain threshold of the people because the people don't necessarily have the leverage they need to get the Chinese Communist Party to act on their behalf. Certainly much different here in the United States of America. People already squawking about gas prices. I myself looking at the pump 2 times to make sure I'm not hallucinating. But I do think, to your point, it's going to probably be longer than 3 days. I think the president is probably reticent to acknowledge that this is going to extend a little bit longer. But, I mean, to that point, let's assume that this is going to go on a little bit longer. What then are the ancillary problems that are facing the president? But also, let's look at the ripple effects, not just, again, for the U.S., but for those adversaries that also, again, are not in a position like China, perhaps, to actually be able to weather that storm.
Well, the ripple effects, as you just said, are the price of gas. Outside my door in Chicago, it's $5.19, and I'm expecting by June 1st, this is going to be close to $6, and this is going to be the problem. That's going to mount. The real challenge here for the administration, Joe, the real challenge is they want a very short-term solution to fix something in 3 days. You've heard President Trump talk about these off-ramps, just a few days. That's probably not the way to look at this. And I'm sorry to say, this is the big issue for the administration. You saw Secretary Rubio start to hint at a longer timeline. Now, that's very painful politically to even address. That's why he was so gingerly about it. But the truth is, unless there's a longer timeline, you can't build a strategy to reverse the outcomes. And that's really the challenge, because if there was a quick fix strategy, oh my goodness gracious, by 70 days in, we would have found it.
Well, I would agree with
and
that.
That's really the hard thing to hear,
well,
is that we need a longer time frame, or else Iran's going to become the fourth center of world power.
Well, I do think we're in a bit of a Rumsfeld conundrum. We have the known knowns and the known unknowns and unknown unknowns. I do think that we're somewhere in the middle here. I think there also have to be certain checkpoints along the way. The first checkpoint was, do we have actionable intelligence to take out the senior leadership of a nation that is a terrorist group masquerading as a sovereign state? The answer to that was yes. The threat has been eliminated. Now the next question becomes, without trying to get into mission drift, are we able to try to make sure that the next administration or the next regime is going to act in a manner that comports more to what we like in the region? The verdict is still out on that. And so I do think that there are two paths here, to your point, Professor. Either we're going to get down the path where Iran is going to come to heed in some manner where the president feels as if we've gotten enough. Perhaps it's extracting that enriched uranium, making sure it's completely out of the region. Or to your other point, yes, then I think all parties just need to acknowledge, be frank with the American people, this is going to take a bit longer. But to your point, if we are on that longer path, then the bleed out does start to happen, where I do think that there's a lot of pressure that starts to build on Iran, where they start running out of friends in the neighborhood very quickly. What do you say to that?
What I say is we're at that fork in the road, as you correctly described in the escalation trap. Either we try to hurry an outcome, and that's going to be military pressure, ground war pressure, or we accept Iran rising as the fourth center of world power. The real issues you're describing where Iran would start to really feel the pressure, Joe, you saw this with the CIA report, which comports with my analysis I did before that report, is that this is months in the making. Right. And so that's why I point out, this is the hard thing to hear, is that if we're going to have a real strategy that's, I like bombing to win, that's the title of my book. If we're really going to win, we need to realize this is a longer game, and we need to win the long game.
Right.
And that is what Secretary Rubio really tried to lay out. That is extremely painful here, as you can hear, but it may be completely unavoidable, is what the reality is.
Well, Well, I think,
and that's
again,
why
it's,
I'm pushing so hard on that.
it's that ghost of the mission accomplished banner over the head of George W. Bush right before we entered into the extended period of securing the peace once the war itself had already been won, trying to make sure history doesn't repeat itself in that particular manner. Professor Robert Pape, always good to see you, my friend. God bless. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. You were terrific, Joe.
All right.